Hey there. Let's talk about brioche bind-offs. So this is specifically for the Expression Fiber Arts brioche-along with the Josephine pattern. Someone had asked specifically about which bind-off to use because the same designer had recommended a different bind-off for the jean brioche pattern that came out previously. So I just wanted to go over a couple of things about binding off and brioche. So I got a couple of swatches here. So here is my one color brioche that I have a German twisted cast on edge, and then I use the bind off here that is what is the recommended bind off for the jean pattern, which is knit the first 2 stitches, then knit those 2 stitches together through the back loop, and then you're going to knit a stitch and knit the 2 stitches that are on the right hand needle through the back loop. So you always end up with one stitch on the right needle, and then you're binding off the stitches that are on the left needle. So that's this bind off right here. A couple of things that you may notice. First of all, it has a very distinctive edge on the back. So you get this chain here. It is kind of flat. So if you, and it's kind of hard to see when you're looking in 2-dimensional space, but your brioche stitches have that definite ribbing. But when you get to the bind off edge, you're going to get a very flat effect, which may or may not be something that you like on the edge of your brioche. When you get to two color brioche, it's a little more distinctive because you bind out, you take the second color out before you finish the edge. Actually, you don't add the second color until you've gotten to about the third row. You have the cast on row, the first row of stitches, and then the next row is where you add your second color. And then the same thing when you're binding off, you lose that second color basically 2 rows before you get to the bind off. And so losing the color and the ribbing when you get to the bind off can make that edge seem really flat. The good thing about that specific bind off, the one in the jean pattern, is that it is nice and stretchy. And so when you're going to block your brioche, your cast on edge, which for the Josephine pattern, you've used the German twisted cast on, and so that's a very stretchy edge. That bind off edge will match pretty well. So that's kind of the good thing. The other downside that you may get with that particular bind off is sometimes it can be too stretchy and end up flaring the edge of your brioche, which you also don't want. I can show you, I've got some swatches here that I'm going to work bind off on for you, but I can show you how to kind of skip getting this little notch at the end. So let's look at the bind off that is recommended for the Josephine pattern. So she says to bind off in pattern. So this swatch still cast on with the German twisted cast on edge, so nice and stretchy on that end. Now this is the bind off edge, and as you can see, when it's laying flat, my swatch, I haven't blocked it or anything, I just finished it. You can see how it bows in. It wants to pull together because this is not a stretchy edge at all. It does have more of the texture of the ribbing, and so it's less of a flat edge, and so it looks nicer, especially with brioche. Unfortunately, it looks nicer with brioche, and it looks especially nicer with 2-color brioche. But the downside of that is that you don't have the give to get that brioche necessarily straight when you're blocking, especially when, so my swatch is pretty small here, when you have the number of ribs that you would have in either the scarf or the shawl for the Josephine pattern. You may not have enough give to get it blocked the way that you want to make it look really nicely, and so it may pull in. Okay, so I have 2 swatches here. My first one, so this is my 2-color brioche, and I'm just going to work this first swatch using the recommended bind off for the jean pattern, which is the more stretchy bind off. So knit the second stitch, and then knit those together through the back loop. And as long as you're not working this bind off by cinching your stitches down or doing something to make it incredibly tight, it actually is a nice stretchy edge that'll give the amount that you want with your brioche. And there's a couple of tricks that you can do at the end to keep it from flaring too badly. So just knit those two together through the back loop, knit those together through the back loop. You can see so far I've got plenty of stretch on here. Knit. My recommendation would be to, hang on, let me try that again, to probably go ahead and swatch and test a couple of bind-offs and see what you like the look of that you're getting. And you can use a couple of my tips here if you want, just to see if you can get the bind-off edge to look the way that you want it to. Come through there. Whoops, I'm really not doing very well here. That's what you get for trying to bind off quickly. Knit two together through the back loop. All right. And when I say that's what you get, I'm talking to myself, I promise. All right, almost finished. So I said I would show you a trick to avoid the flare at the end, which most bind-offs do have, and lots of people use the weaving their ends in to kind of hide that. But there is one other thing that you can do to make that bind-off edge square off nice and neat without having to do that. So get that last. So I have one more stitch that needs to be bound off. You can see I have this final stitch right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to slip that over to my right needle, and I'm going to come over to this edge, and I'm going to pick up this loop, this back loop of the stitch below, and I'm going to put that on the needle as well. I'm going to knit those together through the back loop. And then even though I've been doing that edge, I'm going to do this last stitch like you would normally bind off, which is just lift it over. And then I am going to simply pull my yarn through that last loop and tighten. And so that'll give you a little bit of a squarer edge. And as you can see, you can, you pretty much have the same amount of give on the top and the bottom. And you can get a nice square piece of ribbing. Well, you can get a nice square brioche for blocking. The downside, as I said, is that this edge is fairly flat and may not look great. Once you've blocked it, it's going to be flatter. So that's the first option, is to knit to bind off the way that it says in the jean pattern, the way that I just demonstrated. So here's my second swatch. Whoa, just lost a stitch. Hang on. Sorry. What did I do? Oh no. Lost 2 stitches. Maybe. No. Okay. Need to finish these 2 stitches from the last row because I just pulled them out. All right, so knit, purl, knit, purl. All right, now this is my swatch. Okay, so the Josephine pattern specifically says to bind off in pattern. So you have this 1x1 ribbing that you have when you get to the end. You've already cut your second color. So you can see 2 rows down. That's the end of my second color down here. Sorry, I'm coming off the screen. Sorry about that. So I have basically an entire 2 rows of knitting that don't have that second color in them. So it's already flattened out just a little bit just because I'm down to 1 color. And now I'm supposed to bind off. And to bind off in pattern, you would normally work knit one, and then you would purl the next stitch because it's a purl, and then you would just lift this stitch over that stitch, and you would work that all the way down. So I'm going to work about half the swatch, and I'm going to show you. So I'd knit the next stitch, lift over, purl, bring this stitch over, knit, bring this stitch over, oops, purl, bring this stitch over, knit, bring this stitch over, purl, bring this stitch over. All right, I'm going to stick that back on my right needle for the time being. So what this does is it maintains the shape of the ribbing really well, really well on this bind-off edge. What it doesn't do is stretch. And so maybe on my little swatch here, I could get it to stretch the size of the swatch, but the more stitches you're binding off, the more it's going to bow in like it did on my one color brioche swatch. It's just the manner of that. It just doesn't have enough yarn really to have much give. So there are a couple of things you can do to maintain this bind-off edge with the look that it has, but get a little bit of stretch out of it. So you could go up a needle size. I would go ahead, since you already have the needles, all the stitches are going to be on the size needle that you've been working with. You basically take your right hand needle, if you have interchangeable circulars, and you go up a needle size or two to work that kind of bind-off edge. Or if you just have fixed circulars, then you would get a larger size and work with have all your stitches on the one needle, and then the second size to work the bind off from the right side. There is one other way that you can do this, and it would be to use Jenny's Surprisingly Stretchy Bind Off in pattern. So if you put that phrase into YouTube, Jenny's Surprisingly Stretchy Bind Off in pattern, there are videos that actually show you how to do that. But I'll go through it real quick here. Jenny has one N in it, not two. Well, when you're searching, make sure you look for that. But basically what that bind off option does is it actually puts an extra loop of yarn between each bound off stitch. So it gives yarn for the give. Now, what that also can do is make it flare, just like the other bind off. It can make it flare too much. And so if you were going to use that, I would suggest going down a needle size before binding off, but this is how that would work. So I put this back on my right needle because that's where it was. So instead of knitting this stitch, before I knit this stitch, I'm going to do a yarn over, but because it's a knit stitch, I'm not yarning over from underneath like I normally would, because that's just half a loop of yarn. Okay, so this is half of a stitch basically, and what we want is a full stitch. So I'm going to come over my needle from behind with that loop of yarn, so I have a full loop of yarn here between this and the stitch that I'm binding off. And then I would knit that stitch, and then I'm going to pull both my yarn over and that last loop on the right needle over the stitch I just made. And then I come to a purl stitch, so then I'm going to make a loop of I'm going to make a yarn over the opposite way. So normally if I were going to just purl, I could bring the yarn to the front and purl, but I don't want to do that. I want to actually make a full yarn over and bring the yarn all the way around my needle and then purl that stitch. And then bring both the yarn over and the stitch already on my right needle over the stitch I just made. So you could bind off in pattern that way. Let's see. No, I have to try it every single time because it's just not natural for me. But if you bind off like that, I would strongly suggest going down at least 1 needle size. You can, again, make a swatch, test it out. Basically, you want enough give that your brioche can stretch the amount it needs to. But you don't want so much give that your brioche flares out at the end of your knitting. Okay, so this is kind of my surprisingly stretchy bind off here in the middle, and you can see I can flare my brioche out quite a bit here in the middle now, whereas here it's not giving quite as much. So those are just a couple of options that you can do. It comes down to your taste. If you want your ribbing to really stand out on your edges, then I would go ahead and use the binding off in pattern, either by binding off in pattern as normal, but going up a needle size, or by using the surprisingly stretchy bind off in pattern and going down a needle size. I wouldn't recommend binding off in pattern in the same needle size either way, whether you use the regular bind off or binding off with the surprisingly stretchy bind off. If you don't care so much about your edge looking like the ribbing, continuing the ribbing all the way down into the edge, then you could go ahead and just do the bind off from the jean pattern. I hope that helps.